Hi, welcome to our newest episode. Today we have Susan Canavan on. She is a literary agent at Waxman Literary Agency, where she focuses on nonfiction and works closely with journalists, academics, thought leaders, or masters of their craft to shape and sell A-list nonfiction projects and IP. Prior to that, she was a senior executive editor at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt for 20 years, acquiring and publishing dozens of New York Times bestsellers. She's a graduate of Boston College and holds an MFA in creative writing from Emerson College. Welcome, Susan. We're so excited you could do this today.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here. Thrilled to be here.
So we thought we would start by just talking to you a bit about the book business and, where you think things are for nonfiction books today. How's the market?
Boy, you went right for the jugular. For a nonfiction agent. It has been, 2023 has been a challenging year for nonfiction. It's been the year of the celebrity memoir. As you know, between Spare and most recently Britney Spears, but many others have, that's been the bestseller list predominantly. I think sort of narrative nonfiction has been challenging, and I really kind of have been looking at it, trying to figure out. I think a lot of us in the industry are trying to figure out what's going on, and this is it's cyclical. Nonfiction is down, fiction's up, so everyone wants fiction. And then, but it changes. And I think it'll come back. I think part of what I'm feeling we're seeing is that sort of coming out of, the pandemic and Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement. And, there was there's been a lot of very serious, heavy nonfiction to kind of come out of, the editors were acquiring those books. That's where people's heads were. And I think we're kind of coming out of that and people want more escape, and more storytelling and more, just living in narratives that take them to another place. So I think, I think we'll see the pendulum swing back, but it has been a tricky time.
How much do trends like that actually impact nonfiction writers who are working on a proposal, let's say, because it takes so many years to actually see a project through that I think it's sometimes hard to know how to interpret those trends or whether you're supposed to respond to them somehow as a writer.
Well, it's a really great question. I mean, I think it's, it's a slow industry. And I think our jobs, trying to exist in this stratosphere is to really figure out what people are going to want 2 years down the road, in terms of, looking at trends. Who can do that? I don't know, unless you have a crystal ball. But I really think, as a writer and a journalist, you have to go with your gut, with something that that really grabs you and that you really feel passionate about. And I think, it will find its place and it will find its moment. I think trying to write to trends, especially with that incubation period of a couple of years, it's really hard. It's really hard to do. That's not to say that, there are moments where an author is sort of an expert in the subject or is covering a particular topic in current events that is timely and, can turn around and write a book more quickly and respond to trends in that way. And you see that a lot in certain categories like sports, for instance, politics, where journalists will, kind of be in the middle of something, of a topic and be able to write a narrative that publishers can bring out quickly and respond to those trends. But that presents its own challenges as well, but it's doable.
What does that mean that narrative nonfiction, let's say, or nonfiction in general, isn't doing as well? I mean, there are obviously publishers and editors who that's their main focus. So what do? They don't just sit on the sidelines during it. Do you mean like the advances are lower for those kind of books right now? Or you mean the sales numbers are worse and they're just, I don't know. I guess I don't know exactly what that means, that the market is not.
That's a totally valid follow-up. And I should have clarified. I think when I say not working, there's all manner of ways of measuring the success of a book. I think what I'm really saying in this case is sales are down. Nonfiction sales are down. Like, to make the nonfiction list on the New York Times bestseller list this year was not really much of a leap, because sales just across the board were down. So I think advances will follow that. If nonfiction books aren't selling, like sort of, I'm thinking of like narrative history, or prescriptive nonfiction is a different thing because that actually is working, and we could talk about that too if you want. But I think that in terms of narrative nonfiction, once you sort of see the sales kind of dip and books that maybe they paid this much money for, but they're not performing to expectation, then you'll start to see advances kind of come down. They'll just react to the market a little bit. That being said, editors are really buying. Like, I've been sort of, out with several projects this fall, and editors are looking for material there, and it's, there's been a lot of changes personnel wise in the industry, big changes at Penguin Random House, for instance, and other places. And so, but editors are looking to buy, and it's just kind of figuring out what consumers want, where readers are.
What about, one thing that I feel like we see a lot of anxiety about right now among nonfiction writers is AI and people looking up their books on, that website that, do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that lists every single book ever in print, I feel like.
Yeah, the website that listed the book that had been used to train AI. And you do see sometimes in job ads, like for journalism jobs, that they want someone who is willing to work with AI, which might contribute to this kind of anxious atmosphere. But do you think that this is authentically something to worry about for people like us?
You mean that publishers
AI
or to AI generated books instead of real authors? I think that, when sci-fi starts to enter your daily life, we all want to run for the hills, and it happened with the internet. I think that it's a really tricky question, but I think that publishers are very mindful of this and very wary of it, and firmly believe in the value and importance of having a writer, of that craft and that creation and that copyright and all of that, it's something that is very integral to the ethos of the business. I'm not going to lie, I'm not really an expert on the AI stuff, and I don't, we're all sort of floundering, trying to figure out what it means. We're, trying to put clauses in our contracts to protect our clients against that. And, this language is literally being discussed with heads of contracts departments at all the big five right now. Like, we're all trying to figure it out. It reminds me a lot of when ebooks came about. We thought books were going to be dead. It's a very similar kind of, earth-shaking moment. Happened in the music industry too. And I think that, but this feels particularly scary. But I think that there's a lot of energy around ensuring the integrity of the business. That being said, will there be publishers who will use AI to generate books that serve a function and a purpose? Maybe, but I don't know.
I wonder, like, just in terms of using AI for research, let's say, or something, if we're going to have to start like crediting AI in our acknowledgments, or, I think, like, I kind of see it from a writer's perspective as like a super Google, or seeing if I'm covering all my bases, or just kind of out of curiosity what it says, I don't know. But in terms of like feeling like I'm going to be replaced by AI, that does seem a bit of a jump, because so much of the whole point of writing our type, nonfiction books is typically taking a lot of material and synthesizing it in unique ways. Like, what I'll do with material will be really different than what you do, Alice, or someone else, right? So
yeah,
it seems like, how can you, AI might have its own version, but it wouldn't be what I would write, I guess, although the whole idea is that they copy the style of different writers, but it seems like, I don't know.
Well, let's not forget that in the nonfiction space too, it's a lot of what, and I can only speak to that. Well, I can speak to this as an agent, but also as a former editor. Like, a lot of what you're investing in is the author and who they are and their perspective and what they bring to this topic that's different from what someone else might bring. And that is a major piece of how we consider projects, why books are successful and some are not. It is, and that cannot be replicated by AI. And that is one of the chief sort of marks that, when I'm putting together a project, it's who is the author? What do they bring to this? Why is it different? And why is it desirable? Why is that going to be a better book than if someone else did it? Those are just all, it's a soup that we figure out what the ingredients are, and someone has to be sort of stirring the soup in a way that's knowledgeable.
One thing I'm curious about is I was reading a newsletter this morning actually on like the bestseller list, and they were talking about how it's sort of baked in that when a publisher buys a book, they've sort of decided if they think it's the kind of book that's going to hit the list, and they, gear their pitches and their publicity and all of that sort of with that in mind. So if, you have a celebrity memoir, we were talking about, this is the year of the celebrity memoir, you're already coming, with your publicity plan in hand, and you're coming to the pitch with all of that, versus, a journalist who may not be as well known, who doesn't get all that dog and pony show. If that's the case, I wonder how hard is it to break through that if you don't already have that kind of, power behind you when you come into a publishing house, Do they look at books fresh? Have they already made their decisions when they do, when they offer you the advance, when they give you the deal, they've kind of decided where you are on their priority list? I don't know. I'm wondering how, because you have a perspective, which is so unusual as both an agent and being inside a publishing house. I'm curious what you think. And maybe if that's changed.
Oh, it absolutely has changed. It is, platform, an author who can reach their readers impactfully. It's not just how many followers you have, it's how you use them, and are you engaged, and how can you reach them. That absolutely plays into advanced levels. Absolutely. I mean, it sort of changes kind of the way they even consider a project. That being said, there's nothing a publisher loves more than a sleeper, than someone who defies expectation, than someone who, they might believe in a project, think it has certain hooks. And if the author comes in and really hustles and figures out how to be their best advocate, and those sales can build and build and build, publishers love that stuff. But it does factor. I mean, I think you can't deny it's going to factor into advanced levels. A lot of times a publisher will take on something they love just, sort of in spite of an author's platform, or their track record is another thing. But that's absolutely changed. It's tricky. I had lunch with an editor, Viking, a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the nonfiction and what to do about it. And she said that's really what they're looking for, is these authors who not only have the following, but they have the ability and the sort of engine to convert that into sales and to proselytize, across platforms in a way that, it's like, anymore to be an author, you have to be, it's like running your own business. You have to be a CEO.
When did you see that changing? Was there ever a time when the publisher would just take on a project because they loved it and then do all the work of, building up the author's brand themselves?
Yeah. I mean, I think with social media, it really changed. If I had to pin it to sort of one thing, but it's just changed. There's not the traditional route of, oh, if you get a New York Times book review and you get NPR, you're golden. That, like, because people get their information in so many different places and in so many different ways now. It's, we're not in a monoculture anymore. So I think that's when it really changed.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to do probably a future episode about hiring your own publicist and, exactly what you were talking about, have to be your own advocate. But I guess I don't know if you feel this way, Alice, but I always feel like as a writer, what happens behind in the publishing house always feels like so like a black box of mysteriousness, and it's really hard to vote, right? Like what are the discussions going on? So I guess what I was trying to ask, and maybe like, is it ever movable? Like, are editors ever, maybe they come in, they're excited about a book, but then, they decide, wow, we thought it would be this way and this level, but now we're really psyched about it. We want to push it more or something like that on their own. Is there any maneuverability that way? Or is it like everyone's so risk averse at this point that it's really like they put you in your bucket and that's where you are, and it just gets treated that way from then on? Do you know what I mean? I don't, maybe, like, is there anything we can do as authors aside from building our platform, which we already might have coming into it? Is there any, like, maybe we write an amazing book, or I don't know, something happens, or I guess if there's like a news event, that would obviously maybe change something. If it's a newsy type book, if there's some additional relevance or something, a star dies and it's a biography on a star or something like that. But
I mean, a publisher, anyone in this business will tell you, we can look at pie charts and spreadsheets till we're blue in the face, but it's a crapshoot. I mean, it's a total crapshoot, and there are safe bets, but even the safest bets are not, foolproof. And so it's a very unusual, quirky business in that way, and it always has been, and I think it always will be, because every book is different. Every book has its own life and trajectory, and I think, I'll give you an example. I remember when I was at Houghton Mifflin, and we were publishing a book called Fly Girls, and it was by Keith O'Brien. And, this was sort of very early on in this kind of trend of girl book. They were called the girl books. It's kind of started with Code Girls, and then there was Alpha Girls. There are all these. Anyway, so this author, Keith O'Brien, was writing this book, Fly, and, people really loved the book. But, I will be honest with you, the publicist is like, I've got this guy, this white male author, and I've got to book him for events or for publicity for this book about women, and it was, everybody was scratching their heads. These were the conversations we were having. And Keith went out and hustled. He did speaking event after speaking event. He proselytized about that book. It was incredible. And it was just a really great book. It got incredible reviews. It didn't matter. None of that mattered because people just fell in love with the book, and the book sold very well. And it defied all our expectations. And, it was a challenge, but he really drove that. He was the engine, and he just kept pushing and kept pushing and kept pushing. Does that help?
Yeah. I'm curious, what do you think you like, having worked inside Houghton Mifflin and now as an agent, like what perspective does that give you? Do you think that maybe other agents don't have, or, like what does that mean in terms of your job as an agent?
Well, I found it, a lot of editors try to become agents and find it challenging. I think that what I've found is that I feel like I know what's going on the other side. I know the challenges that an editor is up against when they're trying to acquire a book. And acquiring a book is not easy. You have to really stick your neck out there. You really have to believe in something. You have to make a case for why it's going to work. You have to come up with evidence. You have to be passionate about it, have a vision for it. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy. And if it doesn't work, it's on you. You have to stick your neck out for something. So it's very easy for editors to say no. It's very easy for them to find one thing that, oh, okay, this is a thing that needs to be addressed. And I found that editors are much more risk averse than they used to be. They used to love something and we'll just figure it out. We'll find a way around that problem. But now it's the slightest little thing. So I try to make my proposals Teflon, as I say to my clients, like, so-and-so in marketing might say this because, this is how they react to these kinds of things, or, I was just working on a proposal a couple of days ago, and it's kind of this fun, dishy narrative about a media entity. And there's a joke in it that if you don't really understand the joke, it could be misconstrued. And so I'm like, just take it out. Like, because some marketing director is going to read this on the train in 2 minutes before the meeting. They might see that one little thing. And if they don't have time to process the context of it, that your project could be dead. Like, it's, and not to say that they're not reading these things carefully, but, there are things that, you have to think about. Like, people are busy. You have to get to the point in a proposal, and you have to really think about what, how much is too much and how much is too little. So there are things like that. There, it also helps, I think, to have a perspective, and Julie, you know this well, but when things like, you're talking about covers, or you're talking about, pub dates, or, I'm kind of well versed in sort of the conversation that's happening around the editor on that side of the desk, and the pressures that they're kind of playing middleman a little bit. So I can kind of read through the lines of the speak that they might be giving an author. That it's always going to be in sort of cheerleader mode, right? Not all, everything's sort of sugar coated a little bit, not really, but somewhat. Does that help?
And how often are you surprised by something that, you really expected to do well, just not selling, or the other way around? Like, do you feel like you can usually predict how a proposal is going to fare?
How a proposal is going to fare? Yeah. Yeah. How a book is going to work? That's harder. That's harder because for me as an agent, and for a publisher too, you're less in control. You're less in control of what's going to happen in the news cycle that week that it's published, or, there's so many factors that go into that. But, in nonfiction, in fiction is a different beast, and I'm not the person to talk to about that. But in nonfiction, there are certain kind of marks that, a project can hit. And if that kind of comes together in a way, I can usually predict. I'm pretty good. My clients will often ask me, all right, so how much do you think this will go for? And I will never say, but I always have the figure in my head. I would never tell them, because then if I don't get that money, that's not good for me. But I do have an idea, and I'm usually pretty close. But there are some projects where, you think it has everything going for it, and you just don't, and it does, but you just might not find the right editor at the right moment, who's in a place, there oftentimes it's an editor maybe published a book in that category 2 years ago and it tanked, and they won't go near it. They might go near it in 2 years, they need more time to heal or whatever it is. Or, it's just so many different random, or they, a lot of, this happens. Sometimes you go out with a proposal and you'll send it to an editor, and maybe their kid was sick that week, or they're dealing with family stuff, or they just are buried in a crash edit, and they just don't have time to consider it. Timing. That happens too. So many different factors to go into it. But I generally know with a proposal, this has the goods. I usually, my marker is when I sit down to write a pitch letter for a book. If it writes itself, like if I don't have to agonize over it, I'm like, okay, I'm good. Like if I can do the pitch in my head and I don't have to actually think about, okay, how should I say this? What order should I how should I prioritize the points about this book? Then I usually have a good feeling about it.
Do you think that's a good, for nonfiction writers, often, I wonder about those pitch letters. I wonder if that's something that we should practice or something, or have some kind of, you know what I mean? To know, how would an agent pitch this book, to know if it has that hook or whatever when you're thinking about ideas.
I think that's a really good idea, Julie. I may actually make my clients do that. Here, write your pitch letter. But you're giving me more homework for them. But no, I think, honestly, I'm in the process of, I have a submission out now, and I have an auction on Friday, and we've been doing meetings. And this is an entity who is media trained, is on national TV 7 days a week, maybe not that many, but anyway. And the first meeting was a little deer in headlights, and I was a little surprised, and I realized that this person should have really, and I gave them a heads up. I'm like, you need to be able to talk about your book, and you need to know your elevator pitch. That's a question that gets asked in every one of those meetings. But I think that this person hadn't quite said that aloud, and was back on their heels a little bit.
Yeah. That is the hardest thing for me, to get that 2-line elevator pitch or something, of a whole big nonfiction book. I don't know. I feel like I just got it for my current book, which is already finished being written. So I'm way behind on that, but yeah.
I think a pitch letter is where you have to really kind of crystallize, what is this book and why does it matter? And I found when I was an editor, and when you're an editor, you receive these things and you have an idea, and you might have written a memo to your acquisitions committee that might sit in your files for 2 years, and then the book gets delivered, and then it's okay, here's your chance to present this book to your sales team. And the thing I would always go to first is the agent's cover letter, because that's it. Like, it's all there usually. And it might have changed. And a lot of it, you might be in a different place than you were when you sold it, but there's a lot of sort of that sense of what is this project. And I will say too, as an agent, the difference I've found between being an editor and as an agent is there's no one's pitch letter to look at. Like, you have to figure that out as an agent from scratch. And oftentimes it's, it's like Julie, like you and I, department stores go, that's the first conversation we had. And you came up with this incredible idea for how to do that, and it evolved from there. But a lot of times, we're starting with something so granular and so, just a germ of an idea. So, but that's a moment. And I think it's a really good exercise for writers to think about their books as how would you pitch it?
Yeah. What made you want to change from being an editor to becoming an agent?
I had been an editor for a very long time at a company that had been, was going to be sold tomorrow, or maybe it'll be next week, for a long time. And things are pretty brutal. And I loved what I did. I loved working with my authors, but I was pretty burned out. And I realized one of the things that I really loved to do most was present my books and talk about my books. I love the editing part of it too. And I wanted the autonomy. So I made the leap, and it was scary. And I still, every book, I'm like, oh my God, I'm never going to sell another book. Like, the psychology of it is very different from being an editor, but I found like it just totally satisfies my intellectual curiosity in a way. It's, I could do anything I want. I can sell a vampire novel. I can represent whatever I want if I want. And I love that. I love that freedom, and I can respond to the marketplace faster than I could if I were sitting behind a desk and answering to, a lot of people making decisions above me.
What do you think? Yeah. If you're a young author, we were talking about sort of it sounds like the barriers to entry are super high now. What do you think they should be thinking about most? If you want to write a book, you have a book idea, what's should they be focused on trying to get, should they be sticking to let's say they have a beat, should they be sticking to something on their beat? What is it that they should be focusing on if they want to make that transition from, let's say, being a journalist to writing a book?
I think sort of developing an expertise in an area is valuable. It's funny, I did a panel for health journalists recently in the Boston area, and I was talking about one of my books called The Six, and it's a narrative history about Sally Ride and the 5 other women astronauts who competed to become the first American woman in space. And it's an incredible story of these women and how they get to NASA. And the first thing NASA, these women are badasses. They beat the men on the aptitude tests. And the first thing that NASA does for them is give them a makeup kit to take into space. And so it's just this really great, it's sort of the right stuff for women, right? Anyway, the writer is a young woman named Lauren Grush who covers space. She was at The Verge, and now she is at Bloomberg, and her parents were NASA engineers. So it's just this wonderful mix of this journalist and subject matter. They can't all be like that. And you don't have to be that connected to something, but having an expertise in an area, having a passion for it, or becoming an expert on a subject as a nonfiction writer is really useful. I think getting your name out there attached to that subject when you're trying to kind of get your footing is important. So if it's, an opinion piece or whatever, but I think, these are conversations that, and finding an agent who kind of has a vision, not just for a first book, but for where this might head in general, sort of how to carve out your identity as a writer, as a journalist, as a book author.
Yeah, I guess one thing I was wondering about that too is, do you think that relationships between authors and editors have changed a lot, in terms of like loyalty to a specific editor or house, or, can you go book to book to different houses? And how do you feel as an agent? Do you think that that's an important thing? I know it used to be, all those famous relationships between, well-known authors and their editors and how tight that is. I wonder if that's still the case as much as it used to be.
I think that relationship still happens, and I think it still exists. The longevity of it, I don't think so. But those kinds of incredibly creative partnerships between editor and author do exist. They make better books. There are editors who still do that work and do it very well. That being said, I literally was on the phone with a publisher yesterday. There's an editor who took a job at another house. It's a great opportunity for him, but I had 3 books with him. So now we're getting reassigned and that happens all the time. Like literally it's been musical chairs of some editors moving around just in the past couple months. And so I think that exists. And I think that, but it's those kinds of intense working relationships still exist and still matter. And, but I would never, as much as, when I'm selling a book, I try to match editor with author. It's not always a guarantee they're going to be there, and that's just part of the biz. But it has, that kind of lifelong, it makes me think of like Star Lawrence Norton, who's been there forever, and his, Michael Lewis, all these authors that he's had forever, but that's rare.
When that does happen to an author where they sell their book to an editor and then the editor ends up leaving before it's published, do you think that always harms a book's prospects because, maybe the editor who inherits it isn't as invested?
I don't think it dramatically harms the book. I mean, a lot of it depends on where it is in the process. If it's before the book's even been edited, maybe it's a little different. You don't have that fierce advocate. But on the flip side of that, and this is what I would say, and I should say this more to my clients now that I think about it. Like I made my career and so many other, aspiring editors back in the day made their career by inheriting a project and running with it, and there is this kind of, area of publishing where these young editors kind of trying to work their way up, and they are all hunger, all passion. They're going to give you everything they have, and they're really smart, and you're going to get a completely different experience, but there's going to be an energy level that, I would not dismiss or discount. So, I think it's, as with anything in this industry, it's a case-by-case scenario, but I don't think that it's a death knell because your editor left. I think that in a lot of cases, it could be a real opportunity.
That's interesting. That is hard. I've been through that.
I don't know spin. I'm not just putting spin on it. I mean, look, it sucks. It sucks when that happens, when you make this connection with someone and then they leave or they get laid off or, whatever it is. But it happens and, I think you adjust accordingly. And, a lot of times you'll find that editor, your paths will cross down the road.
Totally. Yeah. It was really sad when my editor of my first book left, but we're still friends and she's going to be coming on the podcast soon. So that's cool. Yeah. So thanks, Susan. I don't know. I feel like this was great. We covered so much stuff. Alice, do you have other questions or do you feel like, Susan, there's other things we haven't asked you that you want to talk about? I don't know, how you feel.
I think it's great you all are doing this. I think that community among writers, especially in nonfiction, that's hard to find. And, you need that support group. And I think navigating, oh my God, what does this email from my editor mean? And being able to workshop that with like-minded, sort of people who share similar goals is a brilliant thing. And it's a great way to navigate this. It is a wild, woolly thing that you're embarking on. And it's, and it's something that you're going to spend several years of your life. And these relationships are important and they take up a lot of space in your head and in your heart and in your calendar. And so, you want to try to get the best experience out of it. So I think it's great that you are doing this podcast for like-minded people because I think it could be a real resource.
Thank you.
I think that's something.
Don't be scared. Don't be scared to write a book, though. It is, and it's an incredibly rewarding experience. And it's funny, this panel that I was on, they, some of the young journalists sort of at the end of were just looked deflated, and it's not because of me. I'm just saying it was someone else who was really negative. But anyway, I just said, if you don't, like Wayne Gretzky said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Like if you don't put yourself out there, and take the risk of embarking on this journey that is writing a book, especially a nonfiction book, then, who will? Like, this is how stories are told. This is how information is gained. And this is an important part of our culture. And we need young journalists to be doing this, even though this industry is scary and it is a bit of a black box. And, it's an enigma, but that's why having a community of people around you to talk to is really important and really helpful.
One more question. I feel like we talked a lot. You have a lot of insight into the writer-editor relationship. But what about writers and agents? Is there anything that writers do that particularly annoys you? Any tips for staying on your agent's good side?
Let's see. No, it's, your agent is your first line of defense. And I absolutely love my relationships with my clients. It brings me great joy. I think that this job is also being a therapist, though. And I always felt that I was a therapist in a lot of ways as an editor, but being an agent, mother of God, it is really being a therapist or a mother, And so I think, I think that it's what I want my clients to do is be able to come to me first if they have a problem they're wrestling with, before they get into a mess with their publisher. I mean, that's why I'm here. And I can help them kind of prioritize, okay, this is a big problem and this is not. And Julie's nodding her head. May or may not have texted over the weekend about this, but anyway, but I think that it is a very important relationship. And I think you want to have an agent who you feel like you can really talk to and really confide in and let it all hang out, and then you are a little more polished for your editor, hopefully, and those in the more trying times. But I think, it's also, I lost my train of thought, but I think that, there are certain things that annoy me, sort of texting me over the weekend, like, it's fine, I'll get to it. It's not like I'm not working all the time, but there's certain liberties that sometimes that relationship can be so close that people take, and it's not a big deal. But there are little things, or not taking the feedback, or what really is annoying is when something is not working and the writer is really frustrated at the situation and they sort of feel like it's they want to put it on the agent's lap, and it's really not fair. Your agent wants everything, nothing but the best for you and more, or else they wouldn't be working with you. So hopefully in an ideal situation. So I think that can be sometimes challenging because it's emotional. I mean, this process is brutal. Going through the submissions process is really hard, even for something that, I've had books sell for, 7 figures, and it's still an emotional process. It's like a whirlwind, but it's emotional and it can be bruising. And so, recognizing that your agent is in that with you and they're on your team, I think is something to keep in mind.
I think it is so complicated for, at least for me, like the learning curve is so steep because as a journalist, your first like connection is usually with your editor. You don't have an agent. So the agent author relationship is often something really new. And like you were saying, in terms of community, especially for nonfiction books, I think, authors tend to write themselves silently, obviously on their own. And maybe over time, I've made book friends. But, when I was starting with my first book, for instance, I didn't know really I had one person I knew who had written a book before, and so it takes time to build that community. And the agent is like your only person, right. So it is, and it's, there isn't really like a best how-to book for those of us about how, best practices, or so you are kind of learning on the job and learning, as you're figuring it out. So unfortunately, I'm sure, Susan, you get sort of the first brunt of that because a lot of us don't know what we're doing, especially at first,
That's part of the fun of it. And it's part of an agent's job is not just to sell your book, but it's to set you up for success, not just for that book, for the next book, and to help you be an author that a publishing house wants to continue to publish, and to help you navigate sort of okay, you're being a little too precious here, right? Like your agent needs to tell you like it is, and you need to be able to take that because they're only doing it to sort of help you, those kinds of things. Like, so it is, you're absolutely right. And you should have an agent that you feel like you can rely on to ask the dumbest questions or, just share a neuroses, because a lot of times what comes out of that is, yeah, maybe we should be pushing on this, or maybe we should be asking this, or maybe we should be thinking about it this way, but I think that's part of what an agent does, is kind of give you that buffer a little bit with the publisher when needed, because it's, it is a bit of a tug of war with a publisher. You always want more than they're willing to give, right? On promotion, on the cover, on the, all of it. Yeah. It's sort of it's a tug of war a little bit. And so figuring out when to push and when not to is, those are questions that, part of it's just instinct, but it really is hard to have that instinct if you haven't done it before and you don't know, you don't know the rhythms of the process, and you don't know, sort of what that editor is up against, or where that publishing house is coming from, what their perspective is and how that differs from yours, and how can we get those aligned.
I'm sure you also have to make judgment calls on how much you actually share with the author. I'm sure, you're probably getting more specific feedback in some cases from a publisher or whatever, or you can infer things since you'd been an editor that you may not, you have to make that judgment call on how raw to get with your authors, depending on their style or whatever, right? As you were saying, there's a bit of a cheerleader atmosphere with books, which is, in my experience, very different from like news journalism, where there's no cheerleader at all. It's the opposite. So, that whole thing is also, I think, tricky, or, whatever. I'm sure you have to deal with that.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is sort of where the author is in the process. Are they at the sort of tender early stages, or the, sort of feeling vulnerable or fragile at that moment? And how do you, or do they want that information? It runs the gamut, and a lot of it, that's why part of being an agent, and this is, something that whenever we're looking for a new agent, like you got to have people skills. Like, you have to be able to understand human nature and be able to navigate that. It's a very human process. And, I have to think a lot of times about, is this going to set this writer back 5 months if I tell them this right now? Or do they need to hear this right now, or else they're going to lose their book deal? This happens a lot with delivery dates when writers are late, and I want to bang their head against the wall sometimes, to be honest with you. But I also know like how hard what you're doing is. And I know that, but I can kind of navigate, okay, this publisher it's fine. It's going to be fine here. They're not worried about it. This is fine. Or, I have to kind of help figure out, you got to figure out a way to get this book done by X, or you're going to be exposed. Like, you're going to be in a position where your book could get canceled. And sometimes that's a hard conversation to have, but it is trying to kind of meet them where they are and figure out what they can take. I made the mistake once and on the submission process too is another thing. I made the mistake once of, I keep a submission list, and it's a spreadsheet. I'm feeling very like, a rocket scientist, because I created spreadsheets for my submission list when I first started. If you knew what a Luddite I am, but I shared the spreadsheet of who had the book, and also what, I would like, oh, pass, here's the reason, I kind of log it in. This writer was like checking it neurotically, like at night, following along, like in real time. I will never do that again, ever. It was so the wrong person to do that with, and so the wrong moment, and so the wrong, it was just such a fail. It was one of my early agent fails. Anyway, so it is like, how much information is too much information, but also, you also need that information because it will help shape decisions that you make moving forward.
Yeah. I remember one of my first stories ever, I let a source like see their quotes, and that was also huge fail, huge time suck, really a mistake. never repeated ever again. So I can relate to that. Well, thank you so much. This was so informative and terrific. Yeah, it was really
super
great.
Fun. It was really fun.
Okay. Thank you so much, Susan. We'll talk soon.
Talk to you soon. Take care.
Bye.